order. Madam Secretary, if you would please call the roll.
Representative Baker.
Here.
Representative Brown.
Here.
Representative Burt.
Here.
Representative Henderson.
Here.
Representative McGuire.
Here.
Representative Obermueller.
Here.
Representative O'Hearn.
Here.
Representative Stivar.
Present.
Chairman Burkhart.
Here. I'll be right back.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to briefly go over, we have some rules of etiquette, and that is if you would please ask questions through the chairman. We don't ask questions directly to another individual. And also, if you would please keep your comments, we don't try not to disparage anybody on a personal level. So at this point, we are going to consider House Bill number 241. And it looks like Chairman Burkhart, I would invite you to present the bill to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. And just for the committee, I think it's appropriate that, as all of us do when we present a bill, we present it from here. So thank you. So members of the committee, I have House Bill 241. Bill proposed roughly by the Department of Transportation with their recommendations. Bill's straightforward. It changes the fees for oversized, overweight vehicles on the roads. And I've heard a lot of this also from constituents complaining about the vehicles being used. And anecdotally, I sat for probably a half hour while an extremely large vehicle that took up both lanes of a 2-lane highway had to be moved, stopped, gotten off the road, traffic would move, and they kept doing this for a few miles at a time to get it down the road. And I think that vehicle had, I would say, close to 24 axles under it. And that very large, very heavy load. And that's part of the reason. And I can tell you, when I came over on Sunday from home, I kind of kept track of the vehicles, knowing the bill was coming up. And I would say probably 98% of the vehicles on the highway are what we would all call a standard semi. 5 axles, 2 on the trailer, 2 drive axles on the tractor and steering axle. I think I saw maybe, I don't know, half a dozen that had 7. I think 1 that had 9, and 1 that had probably a dozen or more axles. So it's not that this is every truck. It's only those that are oversized, overweight. And some of the changes in the fees were recommended by the agency. Some I rounded them off or maybe even added to, and I'll tell you which ones those are. And some of these fees go back close to 30 years since the last time they were adjusted. These fees are in statute, so it's up to us to adjust them. The agency cannot do it by rule and regulation. So with that, I'll go through the bill. And I'm on page 2. Raises the fee from $20 to $50. And I can, because these are not directly in order, the last time that fee was raised was 1993. Okay, page 3. Last time that fee was raised was 1996, and it goes from $15 to $35 and from $50 to $106. And some of you have already asked me, where did you come up with $106? Kind of an odd number. And frankly, that was recommended by the agency. They felt that's what they needed to break even, at least on the fees, maybe put a little extra money away. And that's where you'll see a number of 106s in here. And that was, I asked them the same question. Why the odd number? Page 4, again, goes from $15 to $35 and from $50 to $106. At the top, on page 5, goes from $50 to $106. On page middle of page 5, line 13, goes from $250 to $500. And then if you go over to page 6, that's where we get into fees from $25 to $50 and an increase in the mileage charge. And I would like to talk specifically about the mileage charge in a minute. Later on, line 16 on page 6 goes from $40 to $80. So now the mileage charge, I think that's a good topic of discussion for the committee. The numbers I've placed in the bill are a little higher than the numbers the department asked for. My logic to that was the last time those fees were increased, the mileage fees was 2008, so roughly 12 years ago, 13 years ago, and things go up in the meantime. These are the very large, heavy vehicles on our highways. And I've seen the recommendations, and I've seen the numbers that go from one truck equals 300 vehicles, which is an association number, to others that say one truck equals 4,000 vehicles. And I'll go with the smaller number. But it's still a lot of trucks. One truck equals a lot of vehicles. And if you look at that wear and tear on the roads, I really don't think we want to increase registration fees for the large trucks to be 300 times what it is for a light vehicle. This targets only the oversized, overweight vehicles, and the special fees to all things like very large boats, things that take up both lanes of a highway, loads in excess of sometimes even 200,000 pounds. And normally those loads, you would judge them by the number of axles, because the axles and tires can only take so much weight each. But it's still the overall weight adds to it. Our constituents have to put up with these on the road. It's kind of interesting when you have a large overweight load that's passing all the other vehicles on the highway. I always thought that was interesting. So that's the bill in a nutshell. And I will tell you that most of the fee increases go above what inflation has been since they were raised. But again, I don't think this body, the legislature, wants to look at fees every year or 2 years. We may get out ahead of it, and I can guarantee you, though, in another 20 years or so, we'll probably be behind the 8 ball again with the fees and have to go back in and raise them again. And that's just the way we work. I did look at gearing them to increase towards inflation. And it's very difficult in statute to do that because you don't know what inflation is. And sometimes there's deflation, and do you reduce fees, and you're still behind. So I think just leave it alone. Excuse me. And we'll have to, as a body, come back in and adjust them every once in a while. I have talked and was unable to do it in this bill, the potential to allow companies that haul pretty much the same load all the time. The one I'll use are the wind turbine haulers. They haul those blades. Of allowing them, instead of getting an individual permit for each load, get say a annual permit that will cover the vehicle for the year or 6 months or whatever. Very difficult to do due to the different loads in there. I know there are some companies that haul different materials, and they're always overweight, so they always have to get a permit. So that's the bill in a nutshell, and I would be glad to answer questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Questions from the committee? Yes, Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Mr. Chairman, we'll be hearing from the Truckers Association on this, as we've all seen an email, but sitting on this committee as I have for the past 5 years, I do remember the conversation, and it was a striking difference on the fees that we already charge for these vehicles compared to our surrounding states. And I don't actually want to debate that. What I'm kind of curious on is you talked about setting these to a factor that we would adjust with inflation. But based on that, since we haven't adjusted them since 2008, why now, number one? But number two, what problem are we trying to solve with this?
Chairman
Mr.
Burkhardt.
Co-Chair, thank you, or Vice Chair. Why now is the agency feels they've gotten behind on their fee collections, that they need the money to address these issues, and that's kind of the basis right there. And the other portion of the question, would you repeat it?
Mr. Chairman.
Please.
Mr. Chairman, what problem are we attempting to solve?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative, the problem is the fees have not kept up with inflation. It costs money to process the paperwork. It costs money many times to have the highway patrol, our local community police departments shepherd these roads through the community or these loads. If you look at my community, there is no way to go between some of the major 2-lane roads in the interstate with Interstate 80 without going right through town. And that's it. They looked at it and said, hey, it's been quite a while since we did this. It's probably time. And like I said, I'm trying to get out ahead of the curve a little bit. And that's why they've probably gone up a little bit more than they would be if you merely adjusted them for inflation.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I guess I'm also a little naive on this, and I'm supposing, but where do these fees go?
Mr. Vice Chairman, they go to the department. They're used to administer this program. They probably go into, some of them probably go directly into their highway funds to maintain the roads for these pieces of equipment and that. And I have seen, frankly, I've seen some monstrous loads that were so large that they had to make U-turns on the interstate, which meant all traffic had to stop to get up onto a overpass to then move down on a secondary road. And again, lots of inconvenience for our drivers and that. And yeah, you can argue, well, gee, they bring money to the state. Well, they do, but did they bring an adequate amount on the fees for these permits to compensate for someone having to sit on an interstate for close to an hour while they move one of these loads?
Other questions? Yes, go ahead. Representative Stivar.
Thank you, Co-Chairman. Chairman, is this for all oversized vehicles or the ones that are, because, you know, you've got these vehicles that are dump truck hauling a backhoe. That's an oversized vehicle. We'll have an oversized.
Mr. Vice Chairman, Representative Stiver, it could be. I've seen, call them light duty pickup trucks hauling backhoes. It depends on the size and the weight, and that's spelled out in the statute. I did not address or make any changes in the overall size of the vehicle or the load weight at which these permit fees kick in. And they're adjusted for dual trailer vehicles or multiple trailer vehicles. The large one that you look at that went from $250 to $500 is for house trailers, large campers, large motor homes, and these are commercial movement of those vehicles. Not the guy that might have a 50-foot long motor home that he goes camping with on the weekend. These are for the commercial movement.
Representative Stivar, go ahead.
So follow up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just here, I've seen it last month, 2 months, that on the highway I live on in this town, going south, they've hauled some great big stuff. I mean, big stuff. They stopped, blocked the intersection, but they've stopped and lifted every one of the electrical or communications lines that go across the roads. So this is what you're talking about on that type of vehicle, type of movement?
Mr. Vice Chairman, yes. Very large. And okay, if you look, I'll go to page 3, starting on line 1. And this is one on agriculture, talks about baled hay and that sort of thing. And they give specific size restrictions on width, length. And that B talks about excess weight on the axles. Several of these are directly with agriculture, including one that allows a 90-day permit to haul agricultural or forest products. The main portion of the bill actually is the sections on page 5 and 6, where they talk about penny per mile or or a fee per mile on hauling some of these very large loads, including loads in excess of 80 tons, which is 160,000 pounds. And I've seen loads that I know will greatly exceed that.
Follow up, Representative Stiver. Representative Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman and Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the bill. I make no bones about it that I feel that industry and these vehicles are the ones that do the damage to the road. My question is in my experience, and previously I've had a CDL and been a commercial truck driver. My experience is the enforcement is really part of the issue with this. Is that as soon as one of these checkpoints is put up by Highway Patrol, it doesn't take long for industry to understand where that's at and then go around it. It's frustrating to me when I'm driving down the road and I see a big piece of machinery driving on the road. You know that they didn't get a permit to do that. Sometimes it's the city even, doing that. And so I guess for me, the real frustration is if we raise these fees and we already realize that there's an issue with enforcement and people not getting the permits already, is it going to further the issue with, obviously some of these big companies can't bypass it. They need to get the permits. Many of the smaller ones, they don't. And being a previous contractor, I know people that never got permits. They move their machinery all day, every day. So my question is about enforcement. Can you address that?
Chairman Burkhardt.
Mr. Vice Chairman, Representative Baker. Yes, I don't think this will address violations, and it isn't meant to address the fees. And I understand the point you're coming from. I know there are people out there also that violate them. I know someone who actually did it on purpose because he found out that the fine for running a 300-ton crane on a highway was lower than the permit cost, and he decided to take a chance and run it. I think fines for avoiding it need to be adjusted, and potentially a fine plus having to go back and pay all the fees and the permits in addition to the fine would be a way to address that. But this bill does not address that. And you're correct. It could entice people to further violate things and take a chance on getting caught versus doing the right thing. But I know there are also companies who do the right thing.
Follow up. Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman. Mr. Vice Chairman, Mr. Chairman.
This will confuse you.
What do the numbers look like? What's the macro picture here in terms of how many dollars are we talking about? And I mean, you mentioned the department gave some information on fees that they were suggesting, but as fiscal policymakers, give us something to go on to help make the decision. Thank you.
Mr. Vice Chairman, thank you. Representative, the department's estimate, and again, these were made at a little lower per mile level, fee per mile, are roughly rounded off $5 million additional to the department. So because I used a higher mileage rate of 6 cents on one and 12 cents on the other, and the committee can adjust those up or down if you have a preference. So without those, based on the department's recommendation of 4 cents and 8 cents, it was right at $5 million increase to the department.
Go ahead, Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. So then, comparing where we're at now with what we got coming in, and if we get the new fees, how will that translate as the department indicator? I suppose they're on the line here. How does that translate into how far will $5 million get us?
Chairman Burkhardt.
Mr. Vice Chairman, Representative Henderson, generally $5 million to get you 5 miles of highway, roughly $1 million a mile. But it's also the maintenance that goes in. It's the winter maintenance. It's the clearing snow. And it just goes into the overall cost of operating the Department of Transportation in Wyoming. Some of the cost on some of these things are very high. It's surprising what these overhead light up signs are pushing $1 million. So it would be a number of those. Guardrails are very expensive. So you'd have to put in guardrails or right-of-way fence, that sort of thing. It starts adding up significant dollars quickly.
Further questions?
And I would, Mr. Chairman, I would let the department answer that question specifically.
Further questions for the bringer of the bill? At this point, Mr. Chairman, we're going to go a little bit out of order. I see Senator Costa's in the room. Were you here? Would you like to comment on the bill? All right. And Representative Roscoe, I see that you're here. Would you care to comment on the bill? All right. Then at this point, I'd like to go to online. Do we have anyone waiting online?
Mr. Chairman, if I might add, if you would ask if there is anyone from the governor's office, please.
I will.
Thank you.
Online, do we have anyone from the governor's office?
Mr. Vice Chair, I don't believe we have anyone from the governor's office online.
All right. Then at that point, do we have anyone from the department?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman Luke Reiner from the department is online.
And we'll recognize Director Reiner at this point. So Director Reiner, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. I also have Mr. Byrne and Colonel Ratliff with me today. But let me, for the record, Luke Reiner, Director YDOT. Just some comments on this bill. First, I would certainly thank the bringer of this bill. There is no doubt that YDOT faces fiscal challenges today. And this fee increase would help us address those fiscal challenges. As the bringer of the bill discussed, we currently, with the fee structure as it currently is, raise about 10 a year. The way the fees are structured in the bill, it will about double that, a little over. So that's the comparison there of the amount. Let me just maybe talk a little bit about the history of how we got here. So as part of the legislative process this year, JAC actually asked us to submit a list of fees that had not been increased for a while, then that we thought could be increased. And so that list was submitted, and that list is what generated the bill that you see in front of you today. Now, there's always a debate of, hey, what's your recommendation for increase? And the chairman's correct. What we did was we said, hey, let's increase it by inflation. So some were increased in 1993, some were in 1996, some were 2008. So we just simply sort of did the average inflation and came up with a fee. Some of you say, well, maybe that's not too good of a methodology. I'll tell you that for us, it kept us consistent. And as has been discussed, there's always a discussion about fees relative to other states and who pays more and who pays less and what's the total cost. And it just gets really complex really fast. So complex that sometimes it makes you scratch your head. For some states, they'll take part of their personal or corporate income tax and funnel it to the roads. We don't do that. Some states, will take sales tax and funnel to the roads. We don't do that. And so for us, really, the methodology became, hey, let's keep the fees what they were and adjust them for inflation. And as the chairman said, there's been some inflation some adjustment since then, which we're fine with. So that's really the background on the fees, the history, the fee amount, and where it came from. I think to answer a couple other questions that came up during previous testimony, where does the money go? It goes to our highway fund, and it's spent according to the Wyoming Constitution in support of our transportation system. Why do we have fees for these trucks? Simply put, weight breaks down roads. And there's always a debate, and I will certainly acknowledge the debate about how much and how little, but what we know is weight has an adverse effect on asphalt and on concrete. And so these fees help mitigate the damage caused by these very large vehicles rolling over the road. Mr. Co-Chairman, with your permission, I'd like to pass the microphone to Lieutenant Colonel Ratliff and then maybe stand for WIDOT all questions.
Mr. Director, please proceed.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Lieutenant Colonel Ratliff with the Highway Patrol, and I think the chairman and director have been fairly comprehensive with what they've talked about. I would only offer a couple of comments. To answer Representative Baker's enforcement question, yeah, we fully understand and recognize that companies do just that, and expect that there may be more diversion with some raising of fees. However, we're prepped for that, and with our mobile enforcement teams as they're out doing their thing, we generally have enough resources that we can head off companies that try to drive around us, or we're enough in touch with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration in the state to know what companies are and aren't abiding by the regulations and buying permits. So we would do it that way. We have done our research, and we've done it several times over the years, trying to compare our fees with other states and what they do. And it's just been our experience that every state does it differently, and fairly quickly the calculations get pretty complex. As the director said, some states use income tax for roads. Some states have a wheel tax. We've done our research this last time and got to where we were pretty confident that we were at a level with the surrounding states, and that was what was presented. And just one more thing, anecdotally, as the trucks come into the ports of entry and buy their permits, we are, and we're hearing this from all of our ports of entry as of late, the drivers are making the comment, quote, really, that's all, referring to the cost of the permit. So it's fueling a little bit of why we're doing this as well. Understanding that we may be a little bit lower than some of the states, and certainly some of what obviously the drivers were expecting. Mr. Chairman, that's all I have, and I'd answer any questions.
Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel Ratliff. Let's start with Lieutenant Colonel Ratliff with questions. Representative Baker, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair and Lieutenant Colonel. Briefly, could you just elaborate a little more on the mobile units? Are all the patrol officers trained to do that, or is that a special assignment? Is that something that's seasonal? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Baker, yeah, all troopers are trained to do that, as are many of our port of entry folks. We have 5 mobile, we call them MEET teams. MEET is the acronym. So mobile enforcement and education and enforcement teams in this as well.
Follow-up, Representative Baker. Yes, Representative Brown, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually have 2, maybe even 3 questions. One of them starts out with the director and/or the lieutenant colonel can answer this. Through budget reductions over the past 6-8 years, the term of enforcement came up. I'm curious how many troopers you guys have had to reduce from your motor carrier division and or troopers. How many of those have been left not filled and or reduced after somebody has left one of those positions?
Lieutenant Colonel, please.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Brown, good question. We've strived really hard to not reduce our manpower level as far as troopers go. We have held port of entry positions open and not filled them, and we've we understand that there's a savings there, and we've adjusted hours in I think all of our ports of entry. I'm not aware of I don't believe we have any 24-hour ports of entry now.
Representative Brown, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this is just a curiosity question in regards to the motor carrier vehicles that, I've got one that lives not too far away from me and whatnot, but how does the enforcement on something like that happen when they pull them over? One of these trucks with the mobile scales as opposed to them going through the port of entry. But is there a probable cause, reasonable suspicion? How do they go through something like that on enforcement if they go through the port of entry or they miss the port of entry? How do the troopers determine how they pull them over? I'm just curious on that.
Lieutenant Colonel Ratliff, please.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Brown again. Sure. Great question. Certainly if they fail to go through a port of entry and are called in, we have a violation of law, and they'll pull them over for that reason. However, statutorily, we can pull over vehicles to inspect their loads, their driver qualifications and documents, and don't need to meet that threshold of reasonable suspicion of probable cause. If that helps.
Representative Brown, did you have that? Any other questions for the good Lieutenant Colonel? Go ahead, Representative Burke.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I've got a question on the increase of the fees across the board. We heard a particular bill that came out of this committee, and it's on our general file. We may hear today, depending on how our schedule goes upstairs. Currently, we've also increased our registration fees for vehicles over 80,000 pounds, up to $953.75, plus there's an additional $30 for each additional 2,000 pounds or a fraction thereof, as well as we also went through and we have an increase or a proposed increase of an equalized highway usage tax, also collected by the department, for vehicles over 80,000 pounds, and that's at $1,615 plus an additional $55 for each additional 2,000 pounds. Can you give me a breakdown? Try to keep simple numbers. If we run $100,000 pound vehicle across our roads, if it's registered in the state of Wyoming, which is where we're going to get our registration fees, along with all the other highway usage tax fees, if we go through with this, what is the operating cost for a semi? And I kept it at 100,000. I imagine these pieces of equipment are a lot heavier than that. But for round numbers, I kept it at 100,000 pounds just to be over that 80,000 pound mark. Could you give me some numbers on what it would cost the truck to travel through Wyoming?
Lieutenant Colonel Ratliff, and if you need a moment to calculate that, because I was trying to punch my buttons on my phone, so go ahead at your convenience.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Representative Bird. I honestly don't know. I suppose we could try to crunch some numbers and get that figure to you. I know that there's going to be some breakout with some of those funds to different entities, but I don't know.
Representative Burke. Any other questions for the good Lieutenant Colonel? Questions for the director? Mr. Director and good Lieutenant Colonel, if you would please stay with us, I'm sure there will be other questions that we may want to address. At this point, I would open it up. Do we have any guests that would like to testify? Please come forward, and if you would please just introduce yourself for everyone and go ahead.
Good afternoon, committee, Mr. Chairman, committee members. Thank you for this opportunity to testify on House Bill 241. My name is Sheila Furch. I'm the managing director of the Wyoming Trucking Association. I do have, or I think I have, a member who is also going to join remotely today and will probably be able to answer some of the most specific questions that you might have concerning the types of permits and the fees that are involved. I did send you all an email yesterday that had 2 pages, and that they were comparisons that we had prepared in 2019. Yes, sir. When this very topic was discussed by the Joint Transportation Committee at that time. Excuse me. We understand the crisis that Wyoming's highway infrastructure system is in. And we appreciate the comments made by both the chairman of the Senate and the House Transportation Committee earlier this month regarding the fact that highway funding needs to become a priority. We couldn't agree more. Members of the Wyoming Trucking Association have been supportive of efforts in the past to increase the funding that goes into our highway fund. We're increasing the increase. We support the increased fuel tax this year as well. We've been at the table discussing other funding mechanisms. And we recognize, however, that Wyoming does not have the highway user base to adequately fund its highways without saddling the users with high fees. This bill is an example of that. We are all very sensitive when we talk about the levels of increases we feel are acceptable when we're considering proposals to increase the fuel tax. Usually one of the first questions everyone asks is, well, what are the taxes in the states surrounding us? One of the obvious factors that drives that discussion is because if the user lives on a border where the state next to Wyoming has lower fuel prices, that may drive purchases to the other state. However, with the permit fees you're considering this afternoon, some users don't have a choice. This fee increase will penalize Wyoming manufacturers who must use Wyoming's highway system to ship their goods out of the state for the delivery to their customers. These increases will penalize industries in Wyoming who rely on the delivery of large, oversized loads that must use Wyoming's highways to get to their destination. And these increases will penalize commercial carriers who might not have contracts that will allow them to either collect or absorb the entire permit fees that they are paying up front to move these loads. In a broader view, increasing these fees may also financially penalize the state of Wyoming. When these fees were increased the last time, we received information from carriers that the fees at that time were already higher than many of the states in the United States. Carriers at that time told me that it's not an evasion, it's an avoidance. If they can route their loads around the state of Wyoming, they will, because they don't want to have to pay those increased fees. And this is at the current level, not the fees that we're talking about today in this bill. When we lose those types of loads across the state of Wyoming, we not only lose the permit fee that we're not getting, but we're not getting registration fees or fuel taxes from those carriers that might otherwise travel on these roads. And perhaps that's part of what the fee increase is talking about. Maybe we don't want those loads on our highways. And that's one way to prevent that. Keep those fees high. You don't have those carriers that are able to make that choice to come on our highways. But there are carriers that don't have that choice. So then they are paying those high fees. Along with the issues that we see that the issue of evasion, and we know that happens now. We don't condone it. We don't support carriers not paying fees when they are required to pay fees. Not only does it penalize the state, it certainly penalizes the carriers who are doing the right thing and paying the fees that they have due. And so we don't want to see something that would happen to make it even more palatable for some carriers to avoid paying those permit fees. There have been several comments today that it's very difficult to compare permit fees with the other states. And there's a couple of reasons for that. All states charge different fees. All states compute their fees differently. So to try to compare apples to apples is very difficult. And that will probably be brought up in later conversations. A lot of states offer annual fees, just as Chairman Burkhart was talking about. And that's something we hope that we can consider doing in the future. It would certainly make it easier for the carriers, easier for the shippers, easier for the customers. As Lieutenant Colonel Ratliff also mentioned, all states fund their highway systems differently too. And so they may not have to rely so heavily on one factor over another. However, we need to recognize that while these permit fees may not have been increased recently, what else hasn't changed? The overweight loads haven't changed. They're still being charged a flat fee and a mile fee for the weight of that vehicle. That hasn't changed. Those fees are still in effect. And what are we doing differently that would lead us to believe that it's time to increase those fees for those types of loads? If they're larger or heavier, then they'll pay increased fees. That's a given, just the way the statute's written. Some of those fees are not maxed out. For the single trip fees and things like that, there's a set fee. But for the overweight loads that require the additional axles, there isn't a maximum. It's based on your weight. It's based on your miles. The amount of wear to the road attributed to those overweight loads, that hasn't changed. It's still the same. There's still the same load. It's still the same weight that is on the highways. The condition of the road may have changed because of the age of the road or the inability to maintain the road, which causes the additional deterioration. But should that mean we just continue to raise the rate for the fee for the load that's on that highway? I don't disagree that we need to take a look at some of the fees as charged in connections with Wyoming's highway systems. We're willing to come to the table and talk about that. Some of the fees in this proposal may need to be reviewed. I have heard from Patrol, just as you heard earlier from Lieutenant Colonel Ratliff, that they hear the comments at the ports of entry. I am convinced that that's not for some of these rates. They may be talking about the single trip permits. They may be talking about the single commodity type permit. Those may be lower than what they're expecting to pay. I don't know how those compare with the other states. But to similarly increase all permits fees covered in this proposal by doubling, or in some cases more than doubling, without additional input from the industries who will be affected by this increase, just because those fees have been static for several years, certainly begs for a deeper discussion. And we are certainly willing to be at the table to do that discussion. The information that I sent you yesterday, as I explained, is pretty self-explanatory. It shows one load, one weight, where it started, where it ended, and how much they pay for permit fees in each of the states. Not each of the states. Some of those loads went further, but we asked them to limit the comparisons to some of the states that were either contingent or in the region of Wyoming. And so that's what that comparison is. The carrier that I think is on the line provided some of that information, and certainly we'll be able to answer some more information for you. As I mentioned too, as I said before, attempts to fund Wyoming's highway system strictly by user fees will have some severe ramifications on those users. We do suggest a review of these fees, as well as an in-depth look on how other states fund their highway systems, to be considered as an interim topic. I know that some of you who've served on this committee for quite a while, you've heard that before. You've heard some of the comparisons. You've heard some of the ways other states do it, but I don't know that we've really gone into that deeply enough to talk about exactly what those alternative funding systems are, what works in other states, what doesn't work in one state. I served on a stakeholder committee on an alternative funding method over the last several months, one that is not going to be discussed, and we're happy about that during this session. And at that time, we were presented with a very long and varied list of possibilities of funding mechanisms for highway systems. Most were dismissed very quickly because they just didn't raise enough money. However, a rural state like Wyoming, it will be very difficult to find one solution. We may need to take a look at a variety of funding streams and fees that will need to be considered to adequately fund this highway system moving forward. We urge you to make any changes to the permit fees methodically and not just a broad base across the broad spectrum of the permits that we charge fees for. We ask that you defeat House Bill 241 and certainly consider it as a topic for your interim studies for this coming interim. I'd be happy, Mr. Chairman, to take any questions.
Thank you, committee. Questions for Ms. Forge? Yes, go ahead, Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman, and thank you, Sheila, for being here. Appreciate the testimony. Do you have any data for Wyoming relative to the, the overall annual, road usage, weight, comparisons? What I'm trying to get a handle on is how much of our roads are impacted, and is there a particular area where we might be able to focus on, going back to your funding mechanism suggestion?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Henderson, I do not have that information. The information I do have is basically just a broad look at the entire state of Wyoming and not specifics. I wouldn't be surprised if Whiteout wouldn't have some of that information. And Mr. Chairman, with your latitude, I do want to address something that Representative Burt brought up and that I didn't take advantage of when I was doing my testimony. An average just 5-axle truck, not an oversized vehicle, pays just over $7,300 in state registration and fuel tax fees, highway-related fees, registration. Not all of that goes to the state highway fund. Some of it goes to the county. They also pay another almost $8,000 to federal, state, or federal highway fees, fuel taxes, excise taxes, that type of thing. So that's just the very basic vehicle that you see on the highway. That's their annual fee that they pay just in registration and fuel taxes and any other excise taxes. So these permit fees are then on top of that. And actually, if you're having an oversized vehicle, your registration fees are likely more than that anyway, because that's just based on an average 80,000 pound vehicle. And one thing I want to point out that's very specific in the bill that wasn't talked about, we're talking about these permit fees that the oversized vehicle pays for that load. But I also want to call your attention to the last page of the bill. On page 6, lines 17 through 22, the 11 through 16 talk about the permit fee, but the carrier, the shipper, is ultimately responsible for paying all other costs incurred by the state to determine the routing, the structure, the highway capability. So any of that study that goes into routing a vehicle, the carrier is responsible for paying that. That's over and above the permit fees. So we are talking about a huge stacking of fees that the commercial carriers are responsible for. They get that, they understand that, and they understand why that is. But that's why they are very sensitive to how much they are paying for those fees, for those permit fees.
Thank you. Representative Stivar, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do they pay these fees now for routing? Because if a big truck comes in, says we need to drive from point A to point B, like what I was discussing with mine, and they have to, raise communication lines or whatever, and that's the way they were routed, they're paying that fee now, or is this an additional to what they were?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Stiver, that's already in the statute language, that if there are fees incurred with the routing and different types of structures they have to route around, any fees that the state incurs to help permit that vehicle and route that vehicle, the carrier is paying for, yes.
Follow up, Representative Stivar. Okay, Representative Obermuller, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Hello, Sheila.
Hello.
You've been deep into this subject for a while, haven't you? Do you have any sense of these type of companies that are running these really large trailers? Are they primarily out-of-state companies, or we're talking about interstate travel here? Are we talking about local travel? Can you fill us in on who we're talking about?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Obermuller, we're talking about everybody. We have a lot of Wyoming-based carriers who do oversized loads. You see very specific areas of the state that might have manufacturers that are producing equipment that then has to be taken to a variety of destinations. And some of those loads are done intrastate. They go from the manufacturer to a site in the state. So you see carriers that are operating strictly within the state with those oversized loads. We see a lot of carriers from out of state that also do a load, and it could have a destination in the state of Wyoming, or it could just be traveling across the state of Wyoming. It's across the board.
Follow
Yeah, thank you for that. Also, I'm curious about, you're pushing this theme about how user fees really don't cut it. Do you have any, have you done any studies or know of any that deal with what that break-even travel would be on a fee-based system like we have? I mean, how much more traffic would we need to even cover our situation with fees? Do you have any sense of that?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I don't know. And I don't know if there are studies out there that would help us with that discussion. I think that would be an important thing for us to take a look at.
Yeah.
Because there is there's a cliff that you can only pay so much before there have to be other funding streams. And I don't know what that end game is.
And just one follow-up.
Go ahead, please.
This is more a statement to you than a question, but you brought it up about an interim study, and I like the idea of looking at this because of that issue of user fees just not being able to cover our needs. So thank you.
Thank you. Representative Burt first, and then we'll come back to you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. I do have a question. So in my district, I have a company that provides a lot of mining equipment for particular industries in our area. So I do see these these heavy loads come across my particular area, but I mainly deal with the interstate. So I don't have the constraints that Representative Stivar would have with communications lines and stuff like that, or the bigger ones to where we have to have law enforcement escorts go through if they're particular in those particular routes. Would these fees cover those costs? So if a utilities company has to go out and move these lines in order for a high load, or additional resources to provide a law enforcement escort a particular area, do these fees cover those costs, or would the company have a possibility of having to incur those fees in order for the utility companies to move those lines, or how would that work?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Burt, I would prefer that the carrier answer that question, because I think it is an addition. This fee is going to the state. And I think when there are additional fees, additional people involved in that, and those are additional costs, but I would certainly like to have them verify that.
Representative Brown, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Sheila, this is going to come off as a very direct question, so please forgive me on this, but it seems to me that anytime we ever have a discussion about revenue enhancements, whether it's through the Trucking Association, for education, it doesn't matter. We get pushback. It's always the don't tax me, tax the man behind the tree. Okay. And then let's just call it what it is. At what point would you and your association be willing to talk about a fee increase? I think it's clear, at least in my opinion, that it's not in my opinion, it's factual. To what extent the factual basis comes up is what's opinionated, I think, but that trucks do more damage than cars. And it seems that we've assessed this, we've looked at it, and we've tried to adjust for that weight difference. And it hasn't been updated in a while. So here they're looking at updating it. Maybe it's a step too far. Maybe it's not a step far enough in some people's books. When would you be willing to support a fee increase to help offset the damage that is done by your members and maybe those that aren't even represented by you?
Ms. Forch, if you can answer that.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown, good question. Because we do understand that there's a responsibility. When you're a highway user, you have a responsibility to pay for that highway. And I can't answer your question on what is that limit to that we'd be prepared to say, yep, we're good with that. Because we have taken the baby steps over the years on increasing the fuel tax, increasing the registration fees. We did not oppose increasing these fees when they were increased the last time, even though at that time, our carriers were telling us, what are you doing? These are higher than any other state right now. We took a lot of flack from that when they were increased, those for the biggest part, the ones that were increased in 2008. We didn't oppose that. We certainly paid the price for it as an association, but we're willing to come to the table. We just want to be part of that solution. We definitely want to be part of the conversation.
Further questions from Ms. Forch? We may need a little bit of assistance. You have a guest that is online that would like to testify. He may need to raise his hand. Can you see him?
Mr. Chairman, her name is Melissa Lee.
All right, Ms. Lee, if you would raise your hand if you're virtual, or if you can speak into your microphone, maybe unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Ms. Lee, go ahead, please.
Mr. Vice
If you
Chair.
would introduce yourself for everyone and then
Sure.
go ahead.
Committee, Mr. Vice Chairman, thank you for having me today. My name is Melissa Lee and I work for Corthell Transportation. Some of you guys have seen it, us there before. And I actually, one of my people that I work with is here, Brandon, and he has a few things he would like to say. So I'm going to turn the floor over to him, okay?
All right, Brandon, if you would please introduce yourself and then go ahead.
Yeah, this is Brandon Corthell Transportation.
Good afternoon, Brandon. Go ahead, please.
I wanted to identify one specific point that was brought up by Sheila and one of the council members, and that was the idea of going around the state of Wyoming. So we pay already about $150,000 in oversized overweight permit fees to the state of Wyoming on top of registration fees. Now we're talking about straight up doubling that. And we have a yard in Rock Springs, Wyoming that we transit a lot of our loads with. We're a national carrier, but we base ourselves here and we have office staff, mechanics, all that stuff here. If we were to start going around the state of Wyoming if that was the intention of the bill, for example, we would no longer need this location. And I would worry that if other carriers are in the same location, in the same situation, that it's just cheaper to move your yards and your jobs out of the state of Wyoming because of these large fee increases. I'm not sure that's the intention of council. Does anybody have anything to say about that?
Mr. Corthell, I can assure you that we don't want anybody to move out, and we appreciate your good corporate citizenship and value you very much. So were there other questions? Representative Henderson has a question for you. If you can stay online for us, please.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. A quick question. Where are you located in Wyoming? And did you say $400,000 a year?
Sorry, we spend $110,000 a year in oversized overweight permits specifically, on top of registration and fuel tax fees. And we're located in Rock Springs, Wyoming, just off I-80.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Corthell. Other questions for Mr. Corthell? Representative Burt, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. I did ask Ms. Sheila there, and she said maybe you can help me out on this one. With the routing fees that come through that we've talked about, does a carrier have to pay any additional fees if communication lines are moved, or if you have to have additional law enforcement escorts, in a particular route? Or do these fees cover those? Or I don't know if you know what I'm asking there. Thank you, Mr.
Yeah, that's clear. Any utility work or law enforcement is typically paid extra above and beyond these fees.
All right. Follow up. Any further questions for Mr. Corthell? All right. Thank you very much for your testimony. If you would stay with us just in case there's other questions. Are there any other questions from our guests in the audience? Seeing none, I would close public testimony. Well, excuse me. First of all, I would offer the bringer of the bill. Did you have any final comments?
Mr. Vice Chair, ES1, ultimately, unless the carrier has a contract with who they're hauling with, it's ultimately the shipper who pays the charges. And it's a tax write-off. I had a piece of machinery shipped in here from an eastern state, and I paid dearly to have it shipped in by truck freight. And I'm the one who paid all the shipping charges. And that included all the tolls in the eastern states, their fees, their permits, and everything else that they might have had. And frankly, it's a tax write-off. It's a deduction on my income taxes for the business and that. So yes, I understand that this will affect companies that already have signed contracts, but most contracts have clauses in them that say, if things change beyond your control, you can recoup it. So that's the last thing I would offer. And so, Mr. Chairman, Vice Chair, I'll let you continue with this bill.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With that, we'll close public testimony. Committee members, what is your pleasure? Move the bill by Representative Baker. A second? Seconded by Representative Brown. Members, I think that we've probably read through it. If you would like, we can go page by page. We'll just go page by page. So starting on page 1, are there any amendments on page 1?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, go ahead, Representative Brown.
instead of going page by page, in order to speed things up, I do have an amendment, but it's going to be a global amendment. So I will go through quickly page by page and explain my amendment, and then I'll ask for a second as to what I'm doing. But
Very
on
well.
page
Go ahead.
2, I would motion to take 50 down to 30, 100 down to 60, 20 down to 1025. Basically what I'm doing, Mr. Chairman, in an effort to just make this a little easier on everybody, instead of looking at the existing fees that we have there that are being stricken and rewritten, I'm looking at taking current fees and increasing them by 50%. And that's all fees that we have on this, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so let's take just a moment so our secretary can keep up and also so I can keep up. So if you could just run through that one more time.
You bet, Mr. Chairman. I will do this nice and slow. Page 2, line 6, strike 50, insert 30. Line 8, strike 100, insert 60. Line 14 and 15, strike 20, insert 10.25. Line 17, strike 35, insert 2250. On to page 3, strike 35 on line 13, insert 2250. On line 14, strike 106 and insert $75. Line 4, or I'm sorry, page 4, line 1 and 2, strike 35, insert 2250. Line 4, strike 106, insert 75. Line 5, strike page 5, line 5, strike 106, insert 75. Line 13, strike 500, insert $375. Page 6, lines 2 and 3, strike 50, insert 3750. Line 8, strike 0.06 and insert 0.04. Line 12, strike 0.12, insert 0.09. And line 16, strike 80, insert 60.
All right, thank you very much, Representative Brown. I think I get it. My dad would say, increase everything half again. So that is everybody clear with that? And if we missed one, we can go back and fix it. I think I see a second from Representative O'Hearn. The motion has been seconded. Discussion on the motion.
Question.
Question being called. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. Mr. Chairman,
It passed.
okay.
Amendment has been adopted.
I was just waiting to see if there was any other comment. Amendment has been adopted. All right, any other amendments to the bill?
Question on the bill.
Question on the bill, question being called. Madam Secretary, if you would please take the roll. Or take the vote.
Okay. Representative Baker,
Aye.
Representative Brown,
Aye.
Representative Burt,
No.
Representative Henderson, Representative McGuire, Representative Obermuller, Representative O'Hearn, Representative Stivar,
No.
Chairman Burkhart. 6 ayes and 3 noes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Chair. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 228, Representative Roscoe. And I take this bill up with quite a bit of trepidation. Representative Roscoe and I have discussed this, and frankly, I don't want this becoming another discussion of the term willfully. As you see, or rather knowingly, I think all of you remember that discussion. So I'll let Representative Roscoe explain his bill, which is a one change deletion to statute. One of the simpler but potentially more complicated bills.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. I certainly hope it's not more complicated. So I bring to you House Bill 228. And it's just a bill dealing with the violation of traveling in closed areas, closed roads. And it was brought to me by my sheriff and the highway patrolman in my region. I could walk through the bill with you, which should only take about one step, because the only thing I'm doing is eliminating one word in the statute 24-109, which deals with the failure to observe these signs and markers as you're driving down the highway and approaching a closed road closure. If you look on page 1, down at line 12, it's directly out of the statute, and it says any person who willfully fails to observe any sign, marker, warning, notice, or direction, and that willingly is closed. And what the problem with that is it's making it really hard for judges and highway patrolmen or sheriffs when someone comes over through a road closure. It's hard to actually find them because they can just say that, no, I didn't see those big flashing light signs that said road closure, winter closure, no trailers. They don't, that's all they have to do is say that they didn't willingly pass those signs. They just didn't see them. And so in some of our mountain passes, we have problems with there's winter closures and no tractor trailers over some of these things. And so we're having problems with semis. If you permit me to tell a little example of a semi going up a pass, going through all these things, trying to save some miles, and getting stuck or jackknifed and dangerously causing traffic problems and blockages for hours, let alone sliding into another car or something. So basically, if somebody says that they went by these things and they say they didn't see it, they could be not telling the truth. And the judge and the highway patrolman really don't have that much. They don't have the opportunity to give them a fine that might deter this behavior in the future. And I know I could explain. There's probably a simpler way to explain this, but I'm hoping that maybe there's still a sheriff online on the Zoom and a highway patrolman, and then there was going to be a representative from the Sheriff's Association that were going to come, but they're busy people and they might not still be on there. I did pass it by all those sheriffs, and they thought that they suggested that this would really help them give some of these offenders a fine, and maybe 2 or 3 times offenders, and it would spread the word and have less of these dangerous offenses. Thank you. I believe that's the bill, Mr. Chairman and committee. And if we could see if there's anybody in the audience, that would be great for me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
In a moment, Representative. Any questions for Representative Roscoe? Representative Burt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative Roscoe. My stretcher area that I live in we have rolling closures as the weather moves off and on. Will this removing, I really don't want to get an argument on or debate on the willfully. If the rolling closures, and I've traveled the highway and I've had the closure in that, where it's closed behind me and I'm able to exit the other way. Does this affect those drivers that get stuck in those closures behind them as they're moving across the interstate? Thank you.
Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Burt. It would affect, it just gives the sheriffs the prerogative, which they do. And I'm sure, I'm not exactly sure how that would play out. It'd be nice if we could talk to a highway patrolman about that, but I don't think it's certainly not the intention is to find somebody that was, captured in that time period when they're.
Follow up.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Are there protections in place for those that are just trying to get from point A to point B, that want to follow the law, that are stuck in the closure versus those that are trying to skirt around the systems that this is that the intent of this bill?
Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't really know. I don't think if they were stuck in the middle of that, I don't think they would actually be breaking the law because they didn't go by any signs. Is that the example you're speaking? Thank you.
Representative Stiver.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the same lines questions that Representative Burt down there did, like I work out in the middle of nowhere, so does he. And then road closures come up and we're on our way back into town and we're caught. I've been caught twice now. I'm out in the middle of nowhere, the roads are closed and I'm out there along the right of way for 2-3 hours doing something. Then I head back into town and the roads have been closed and the patrolman's going, come here. And I have to explain that to him. Well, no, I've been out here between point A and point B. Didn't know the roads were closed. So if somebody's stuck out in the middle between point A and point B where they close the interstate and they jump on, or in fact, we'll just take over there and in between here and the city over the hill, there's a exit there that says, roads are closed. Right there on that exit.
Representative Roscoe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So once again, I would probably defer to a sheriff that if you didn't pass a sign, but you are behind one, I don't think you've broken the law. But I myself have been in that situation where I come back and look over, there's the big gate is closed and I was on a closed road, but that's not, I don't believe that is against the violation. You didn't go by a sign or marking, which is what this statute refers to.
Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Maybe I missed this, Representative. I appreciate the bill. Very interesting. Why do we need this? Why do we need this change, please?
Representative Roscoe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Representative Henderson. We need this because there's no way for the sheriff or the patrolman or a judge to give someone a fine to discourage this behavior in the future if they just simply say, I didn't see the sign. And so in a way, it's they're having a problem with people just not telling the truth. And so and when they say that I didn't see the sign, even though it wasn't a closed gate, it was just a flashing sign or just a regular road closed sign. And they didn't, so it doesn't give the judge, because of this willingly, in front of fails to observe any sign or marker, it doesn't give the judge the ability to give them a fine.
Representative Henderson, follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just building on that, do you have complaints from the judge, the court, or a constituent?
Representative Roscoe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, Senator Henderson, this was brought to me by sheriffs who have this complaint because there's trucks going over passes in the wintertime where they're closed for maybe 3 months in the wintertime. And these might be reoccurring offenders. And there's been tremendous problems with semi trucks going over a winter closure in the wintertime, sliding off and causing accidents with other cars that are legally on the road. They're also closing the road and this one that I'm thinking of is my district is, it's obstructing for hours and at great expense interstate commerce between our state and the next state.
Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And actually, it's not as much of a question as it is a clarification for the committee. One thing to do is to take a step back and get away from this striking the word willfully and read the rest of the statute. And as you read the rest of the statute, it'll help explain a few of the questions that have come forward and read the paragraph as it is now and step away again from the striking of the word. And that's what we're trying to do here. But it says any person who fails to observe any sign, marker, warning, notice, or direction placed or given underneath 21-108. So to the questions that were, well, if I'm in a rolling road closure or something like that, you have not witnessed or observed those closing gates. This is those that if you pass the gate or if you go around the barrier, that's failing to observe. That's where the highway patrolman, the sheriff, anybody like that would have the jurisdiction to pull you over and say something like that. They still actually have the jurisdiction to pull you over. There's reasonable suspicion to pull you over if the road is closed and you're driving through there. But the term being stricken here is willfully. I think it's understandable why we're looking at doing this. I'm not completely sold on the idea, but getting away from the term willfully and just looking at what we're actually going to say in statute now is very beneficial for the rest of the committee to take a look at that. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Other questions, Representative Burt?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you for that, Representative Brown. I guess that where that question was coming from is if I've got a barrier down and I'm out by myself in the middle of nowhere in the interstate, the vehicle that I drive, I can drive around these barriers. So I guess the bigger question is, does it shift the burden of proof on whether or not I'm innocent or guilty upon the citizen versus the courts?
Representative Roscoe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Burt. Would it shift I suppose it does certainly give the law enforcement at least more of a chance to use their discretionary choices on what they should do about that. And I've done that same thing. But usually some of these road closures, there'll be a highway patrolman there. And if you just have to go a little ways that maybe they've blocked the road for a long distance and you just need to go one exit and it's fine, they will give you permission to do that.
Okay. Representative Burton, I'll remind the committee, I would like to get the other bill handled today also.
Just quick, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to clarify that I do not drive around barricades. So I just want to put that on the record because I know the department may be watching and they get my license plate. I do not drive, just making an example that I could. I do not. So thank you.
Other questions? Seeing none. Amanda, is there anyone in the waiting room?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
I see Director Reiner. Director Reiner, welcome again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, Luke Reiner, Director YDOT. Mr. Chairman, we support this. As this came up from our patrol, the deal is that we have people intentionally disregarding road signs and driving around them and not being ticketed because they tell the judge, I didn't see it. I didn't see it. And it just causes stress, and it's not right. And so by striking this one word, it helps hold individuals responsible for their actions. Mr. Chairman, that would, from my perspective as a director, that's my observations. With your permission, we'd like to ask Colonel Ratliff from the patrol to add his perspective.
Colonel Ratliff, anything to add to this?
Mr. Chairman, sure, and I'll be brief. The burden of proof is still on the state to prove that the individual did indeed drive around a barrier, to answer a previous question. And we have a program, WYDOT has a program whereby if there is a rolling closure and it's safe for you to get to your destination, we'll allow that. That's not what this bill deals with. Mr. Chairman, we as has been testified to, we frequently have people driving around road closure gates, and more and more so in these areas where there's a hesitancy to prosecute these, and it's extremely dangerous to go around a road closure gate. The patrol in WYDOT at times may abandon a road that is just getting ahead of us so much that it's unsafe for us to be out there, and we'll get a call from a stranded motorist who went around a gate, and we have to put together a team of people to try and rescue this person. And this, with the influx of traffic, the increase in traffic that we're experiencing, and the reluctance to prosecute because of that word willfully, it's a challenge, and it's getting to be an issue.
Okay. Thank you, Colonel Ratliff. Any questions? Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is it a moving violation? 24-1109 is violation of that. Is that a moving violation?
Colonel Ratliff.
Mr. Chairman and Representative McGuire, no, it is not.
All right. Anyone in the audience wish to speak on this bill? Okay. Who else have we admitted, Amanda? I cannot read the names through these plexiglass things.
Mr. Chairman, we've admitted Terry Armitage.
Okay, Mr. Armitage, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Terry Armitage. I'm with the Wyoming Sheriffs and Chiefs Association, and I wanted to speak in support of this bill. Basically, by way of background briefly, I've been an attorney in Wyoming for the last 35 years. Half of that time was spent at the Attorney General's office, half of it in private practice. I've worked with law enforcement throughout my career, and even been a guest lecturer up at the Academy for a period of some 18 years. Basically, without getting into legal terminology, I don't know why the word willfully was put in this to begin with, because it raises the standard of proof. And you don't see this in the traffic code elsewhere, except at a couple rare occasions. Willfully gets into the mindset of the person, whereas typically speeding offense, if you're speeding, you're subject to a citation, for instance. And put in the word willfully, and then it's beyond whether or not the person committed the offense, but what was their mindset at the time. And it really doesn't work well in situations like this. So I would suggest that taking out the word willfully would put this law on the same level with most others in our traffic code, and eliminate this kind of a dichotomy of a higher burden of proof for law enforcement and for the county attorneys.
Thank you, Mr. Armitage. Any questions? Okay. Thank you. Okay. Committee? I think I heard the bill moved by what? I don't. Any other public comment? Anyone else on the internet, Amanda?
Mr. Chairman, there's no one else.
Okay, thank you. So moved by Stiver. Oh, moved by O'Hearn. Seconded by Stiver. Discussion on the bill. Any amendments? Question being called. Oh, I'm sorry, Representative Stiver. Okay.
Knowingly.
Okay. All right. Okay. Question being called. Diana, would you take the roll, please?
Representative Baker,
Aye.
Representative Brown.
Aye.
Representative Burt,
No.
Representative Henderson,
No.
Representative McGuire.
Aye.
Excuse me.
Aye.
Representative Obermueller,
Aye.
Representative O'Hearn,
Aye.
Representative Stivar,
Aye.
Chairman Burkhart.
Aye. Okay, thank you, Representative. We'll see you on the floor. I hope we don't overwork this. Thank you.
Okay.
Senator Cost, please join us. We have roughly 15 minutes. Can you explain your bill and answer questions in 15 minutes?
Mr. Chairman, I can explain this bill in about 5 minutes real quickly and give you 10 to do whatever you wish.
All right.
There might be a couple of speakers that are probably going to say they support the bill.
Okay. For the committee, you should have, all of you should have a blue copy marked engrossed. And I think this may be the first time some committee members have seen this. And just for the engrossed copy is the copy from the Senate with all the changes made to it by the Senate, which means they did make some changes from the original bill, that this is the bill we work, is the engrossed copy, the blue sheet. And for the committee, if you have any bills that end up going to the Senate, make sure you work from your engrossed copy when you go the other way, as Senator Cost is. Senator, please tell us about your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'll explain what that amendment was as I go through so that you know where we made the change. All this is the Garland Light and Power came up to me saying they were having a problem trying to get to and be safe when a line was down or they had to stop people from traffic for work on electrical line or something. Right now, the utility vehicles are only equipped with an amber light. They said, would it be possible to be able to use a red light in those emergency situations? I talked to the, through communication, the highway department, Wyoming Highway Department talked to us and said they would support it. And so our director helped write this bill. All it is on the intro, you will notice it says when an authorized municipal, I'm sorry, on page 1 down on line 14, when an authorized municipal public utility or highway construction or maintenance vehicle is stopped or is moving at less than 20 miles per hour on or within 3 feet of the roadway and is making use of any visual signals provided. So this is, they just added utility vehicles to that. Then if you go down, they added, excuse me, H, which simply says, in addition to those lights otherwise authorized by law, a public utility vehicle may display one or more flashing lights visible from 500 feet. And this is where the amendment was changed. Originally, the statement said in front of the vehicle, and they said 500 feet viewable anywhere in the vehicle is what the amendment became. When providing emergency services for the purposes of this subsection, public utility means as defined in Wyoming Statute 37-1-101A, Romanet 6. And that's really all it is. And remember, the important part here that I want to make sure is it says may, it doesn't say they shall or must. It's an opportunity for them to be able to put a red light on so that when they are in those situations, they may use the red light to get through traffic to an emergency, or when they're on the side of the road, or for a gas line leak or whatever, as they're parked, to be able to use the flashing red light. And that's all there is to the bill.
Okay. Any questions for Senator Cost? Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, my only question was why just to the front? And your engrossed copy answers that question for me. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Okay. Senator, I do have one.
Yes,
What
sir.
is the meaning, the purpose of a red light?
Well, if you were to drive down the road right now and observe different flashing lights, you will find that tractors, that wide loads, that there are a number of amber lights that flash, and pretty much everybody looks at them as a flashing amber light and they are not paying much attention to them. When a red light comes up behind you on the highway, I think most of the time you're like, oh crud, what's wrong? Or is it police or what? And you take alert and you move over to find out. That's the purpose of the red light.
Okay, thank you. Okay, no other questions? Oh, Representative Burt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just quick. I would have to imagine that if a utility worker is abusing the red light, not going to work in emergency the way that this is intended, that they would fall under the law as, improper use of a I don't know if it'd be emergency light. I don't know how that law would be written, but.
Senator?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Burt, you're right. It says in an emergency situation. So this is for emergencies, but not the general run of the day.
Okay, thank you. All right. Amanda, anyone in the waiting room to speak on this?
Mr. Chairman, there's no one with their hand raised in the waiting room. However, we do have Director Reiner in the webinar.
All right. And Amanda, no one from the governor's office, I assume.
Mr. Chairman, I do not see anyone from the governor's office.
Thank you. Director Reiner, brief comments, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. As the senator said, we assisted in writing this bill. It's in accordance with current statutes. We have no issues with this and think it's a good addition.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Director. The only question that I had was when I did see moving, and then the senator alluded to it. So the only thing that is concerning to me is now we have people who are moving through traffic displaying red lights, and they're not either a peace officer or ambulance. And I'm just wondering, I presume that you considered that when you were reviewing the bill, and I guess I'm just asking if there's any further consideration to that.
Director.
Mr. Chairman, Representative McGuire, that's correct. We did review that. That was part of the review process. And in this case, the public utility definition was met, and we were comfortable recommending that this statute be passed.
Thank you. Okay, anyone in the audience wish to speak on the bill? Mr. Taylor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, good to see you all. Some of you for the first time. My name is Sean Taylor. I'm the Executive Director of the Wyoming Rural Electric Association. We represent 14 rural electric co-ops across the state. And as Senator Cost alluded to, one of our co-ops general manager, I think, is going to be on the call. But to make it short, we support this. We got to be able to get to, our crews need to be able to get to an accident and decharge a line, if you will, in order for the first responders to get there and do what they need to do. So it's really just, they got to be, turn those lights on, get out of our way so we can get there, so we can help everybody out. So with that, Mr. Chairman, like I said, Molly Lynn is the general manager of Garland Light and Power, and I believe she's in the waiting room.
All right, thank you. Any questions for Mr. Taylor? Representative Obermuller.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sean, is the practical effect of this is that these red lights will be on all utility trucks at this point?
Mr. Taylor.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Obermuller, not on all of them. It would be, the bucket trucks or whatever they would take, and Ms. Lynn could probably answer that better, but it'd be on the trucks that they would take to their to the emergency. So if it's just a company SUV, maybe not necessarily there, but again, Molly might be able to shed a little bit more light on that. And one more thing, Mr. Chairman, this isn't just for the co-ops, and I don't want to speak for the other utilities, but they're not here, so I will, and they support the bill as well.
All right, thank you. Other questions? Amanda, I see Ms. Lynn there now. Ms. Lynn, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for giving me a few minutes of your time today. My name is Molly Lynn, and I'm the General Manager for Garland Light and Power. We've experienced a number of instances when our crews are trying to respond to structure fires, vehicle accidents, and downed power lines, and they have had trouble getting through traffic to the scene. It is imperative that our crews and the crews of all utilities respond to these incidents in a timely manner, even before first responders, so they can de-energize the lines and make the scene safe for law enforcement, EMTs, firemen, and the general public. Many times the first responders are waiting for the utility companies to get there so they can safely do their jobs. We feel that allowing utilities to install these lights on their vehicles would draw attention to them, much like an ambulance or law enforcement vehicle, and alert the public to pull over and give our crews a path to the fire, accident scene, or other emergency. And again, allowing our linemen to make the site safe for everyone. Thank you for your time, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Ms. Lynn? Any questions? Ms. Lynn, thank you very much. Anyone else wish to speak on this bill? Okay, with that, I'll close public testimony. Committee? Moved by Burt, seconded by Henderson. Is it? We're gonna vote on that. Okay. Okay. Right. Any discussion on the bill? Okay, question having been called. Diana, would you take roll, please?
Representative Baker,
Aye.
Representative Brown has submitted an absentee ballot of aye.
Okay.
Representative Burt,
Aye.
Representative Henderson,
Aye.
Representative McGuire,
Aye.
Representative Obermueller,
Aye.
Representative O'Hearn,
Aye.
Representative Stivar,
Aye.
Chairman Burkhart.
Aye. And let's see, it looks like Brown, Greer, and Henderson are House co-sponsors. Brown isn't here. Representative Henderson, you'll manage it on the floor for Senator Cost.